Welcome to the first Climate Emergency podcast with me, Will Pearson, Climate Change Manager for the Council, and my colleague George Ablett, our Energy Sector Specialist. Today's podcast is all about saving energy, and we're going to be discussing some simple steps we can all take to save energy both in work and at home. So George, what simple steps do you take at home in your own personal life to try and save energy? Is there anything, what's the most impactful thing for you?
Well, for me, the most impactful thing is actually knowing, first of all, where and when I'm using the energy. And to do that, you can either use smart meter or a normal meter. What have you got, Will?
I've just got a normal meter.
So with a normal meter, it's really, really simple. All you do is you go and read the meter before you use a device such as a washing machine or a dishwasher, let it complete the load, go and read the meter again, and that can tell you how much energy it's used during that cycle. They do give a guide on most new products that you buy about how much energy it will use each year. But you need to sometimes just compare those different cycles to see if you can save energy. On some of those devices, there'll be something called an eco mode. Now, Will, what do you think that stands for?
Economy.
Economy is absolutely right. Some people think it's for the green setting, but economy is actually the correct term, meaning economical or the cheapest option on that particular device to run that device. It isn't always quite true, because sometimes if you've got a half load in a washing machine, for example, more of a quick rapid wash might actually save you some energy. So it's worth playing around with those meters and having a read about what those cycles do, and also getting to know your device. Another thing to do with those devices is to make sure they're well maintained. A well-maintained device, for example, a boiler or washing machine, etc., and dryer, removing the lint for it, can have a huge operational difference and really make some of those key energy savings.
Note to self, I should definitely get that boiler service booked in. So on the topic of boilers, many people, most people, I would even say, have gas boilers, and there's a lot of different there's a big difference in the efficiency of a gas boiler, isn't there, between one that's set on its absolute max temperature and one that's in condensing mode. So George, could you tell us a little bit about why that matters and what temperature people should be looking to set their boilers at to achieve the best efficiency possible?
Absolutely will. So, I mean, there are different types of boilers out there. The majority of modern homes now currently have a condensing gas boiler, and you can tell when it's in condensing mode either on the boiler itself, it will be set to it, or when the boiler is operating, you should see some white steam coming out of the flue pipe. So two quick ways to tell. On your annual boiler service, it will tell you how efficient your boiler is currently operating. So it's worth just checking that on the annual statement, or having a quick chat with the engineer who comes to service the boiler, just to make sure it's up to date and efficient. In terms of temperature, again, depending on what you're trying to do with it, but operating around 60 degrees C as a minimum. Needs to be there for Legionella purposes, but anywhere in that kind of range is about right for what you need to do. Certainly no higher than 65 degrees centigrade. Is there anything, Will, that you do at home that you can think of that are small habits that people might take on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really like I think it's small, simple things. To obviously the heating's not on at the moment, but when the heating is on in the colder months, not heating rooms that aren't in use. So not heating like the downstairs bathroom, the utility room, any bedrooms that aren't occupied. I've got a storage room full of clutter, and there's no need particularly to heat that. So there's some myths, aren't there, that you need to heat the entire house, or and that's more efficient, but that's not the case. It's my understanding. We need to make sure that we're not heating rooms that aren't in use, and also the effective use of the thermostatic radiator valves, the TRVs. that that enable us to control heating in different rooms to achieve the level of comfort that we want. So George, I don't know if you could just tell us a little bit more about how people should be setting their TRVs, what what they mean, and what's the most efficient way to use them.
Yeah, well, some really great suggestions there, and absolutely right on only heating the space that you are in, and that's going to be particularly relevant as people work from home more with this agile working and modern workforce. In terms of thermostatic radiator valves, for those who don't know, that's the dial that you'll find to one side of a radiator. Now, these set the temperature that's flowing through that radiator. They don't normally have a specific temperature marking, but normally sort of a 1 to max level. The lower the number, then the lower the temperature that the radiator will switch off at. It's controlled by a wax inlay, which expands and contracts to the space it's given in. So the way you really need to look at them is firstly to find your comfort level and then just to leave them alone. Don't walk into a room and start adjusting them. One, because you need to allow your body to adjust in terms of temperature. It takes the average body about 10 minutes to do so. And also, then you're making your boiler work really hard if you keep adjusting the temperatures. My advice would be for the downstairs or your main rooms where you are in, then those ones need to be set to the higher levels. But you can also imagine with a house that heat rises, so your upper rooms and spaces like you mentioned, like a downstairs loo or something like that, those can really be set to lower levels and have less heat output. But something else to consider is drafting and drafts coming through the house and identifying where those are, and blocking those up. It's usually really quite cheap and really quite economically effective to make sure that those drafts aren't flowing through the house. You do need some natural air coming in the house, obviously, for health reasons, but generally that air exchange needs to be as minimum as possible.
Thanks, George. I'm in a new build, so I thankfully don't have too many drafts, but I've lived in some drafty places in the past. And so, are there any like quick tips for how you can identify where a draft is coming from? Any like simple tips to that effect?
Well, the easiest one obviously is just sitting down and trying to feel where the draft is coming from, but your usual suspects are things like under the kitchen cabinets, around windows and doors, particularly if seals around the door or windows aren't operating effectively, up through floorboards. If you haven't got carpets down, or if you have wooden floors, then there's usually some fairly quick and obvious places that they might be coming from. If you're struggling to identify it, then you can use the old wet finger method, which just gives a better idea of which side of your finger is feeling cold, and that can help you identify towards where the draft might be coming from. So a number of different things to look at there, but certainly some fairly quick ways in which you can identify a draft and block it up.
And when you say block it up, what are there any particular like products or types of products you'd recommend? Obviously, like draft excluders, draft excluding tape, or are there any life hacks that you would recommend?
Well, a draft excluder at the end of the day is just like a concentrated bulk of material. So, if you want to go for a really cheap method and not and fairly easy to do, if you've got a spare old jumper or anything like that you can overlay or cut in strips, or even just put down where the draft is happening, it will create a temporary measure until you can do something a little bit more permanent with some fiber insulation, perhaps.
That's great. Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
I was going to say one last quick tip from me, and it's one that I did last night, in fact, that I was thinking about, which is actually putting lids on pans as you're cooking. It's dead easy to do. At the end of the day, it's really easy to forget to do it, but you can put the lid on the pan, and then you can really turn down that dial in terms of the cooking or gas, electric, or whatever's coming up as your fuel supply, and the pan will still boil effectively.
That's a great tip, and one I'm guilty of forgetting sometimes. One of the things I've done recently that I found really easy, and I know it's not gonna it's not gonna change the world, but it is helpful, is put kind of radiator backing on. So George, what's your take on, whether that's something that we would recommend, and how easy how easy is it to do? Because frankly, probably took me the best part of 15-20 minutes to do all the radiators in the house. I found it a very easy process to put some kind of foil backing on the radiators. So what's your take on that?
So I've got kind of two takes on this. One is for your modern house, and particularly for radiators that are under windows, for example, on external walls, where it is absolutely and ideally effective, and I would highly recommend doing it. The only kind of area where I would say maybe not so much is where you've got a concrete or an older house with a thermal conductive block on an inner wall, in which case you might be using the wall almost as a storage heater, and you can run the heating for a less amount of time, and use that concrete block to almost emit heat coming at a lower and comfortable level over a longer period. So only in those very kind of isolated circumstances would I say that maybe that's one way. You don't want to put a reflective panel behind the radiator.
Yeah, well, that was really, really helpful, and good to know. Hopefully some useful tips there about radiator panels in particular. One of the things that really, I suppose, embedded energy saving in me was mostly my mum yelling at me about whether I was A, born in a barn, or B, whether these were Blackpool illuminations. So is that the communication method you would recommend with children, or are there other methods than saying those two phrases?
Well, I certainly remember my parents also yelling at me to switch things off, particularly coming out of a room. And the point about it really is that it's a clear, simple message that the child understands. It may not have to be delivered at necessarily the top of someone's voice, but certainly explain to children, the simple and repetitive things like leaving a room, switching the light off, making sure they're switching things off after they have used them. Those key simple messages are really good ones to do. But also, we're coming up to the summer now, and for me, it's getting my kids outside so they're not on their electronic devices, either charging up phones so they can then watch or play games or chat with their friends, or sitting on an Xbox at home. So it's getting them outside, getting them out to go and play, and that way saving energy. I appreciate it's a little bit harder once winter comes and the weather isn't as good, but for that period of time, you might encourage reading instead of necessarily sitting on an electronic device, and using the local library to do so. So it's free at the local library. You pick up a book, it doesn't use energy, and it's a really great way to keep the children involved and getting them reading, which is another a great thing for them to do. There is, if they really are kind of getting into it, you can also get them to read the meters and do a little bit of kind of analysis on how much they might save and whether that could then afford them something as a measure or way to encourage them. I know certainly for myself, my kids often tell me I've got more photographs of electric and gas meters on my phone than I have of them. So it's certainly something that they'll recognise from school, because school do occasionally run these sort of programs, but it's something you can get them involved in at home as well.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's great, George. That's about all the time we have today. Thank you so much for all your advice on that. So this is just the first in a series of podcasts that we're hoping to do, and we'll cover a whole range of different topics over the next few weeks and months. Please do send in your suggestions for any topics you want us to cover, or any tips that you have that you'd like to share with us and with wider colleagues, to climatechange@cheshireWesternchester.gov.uk. So that's all from us. Thanks very much, and hope you'll listen again next time.